As we know, the conservatives, the conservative-leaning, and those in general opposed to woke ideology permeating society have been actively speaking out against transgender child surgeries, rightly called genital mutilations, mastectomies, vaginoplasties, and other bizarre operations done under the narrative of gender-affirming care. The rage against performing this act on children is not the part I have a problem with, simply because they are absolutely correct. These are in fact cosmetic child mutilations performed on minors, very likely at the behest of adults treating their children as pets or pieces of personal property. When they call surgeons who perform these acts monsters and butchers, they are again correct. My problem, as those who have followed me know very well already, is that for all their talk about child genital mutilations, they are disturbingly silent about the most normalized, most prevalent kind of child genital mutilation in North America for allegedly medical reasons since the late 1800s, and not including the ritualistic and religiously motivated mutilations far back in human cultural history. Not only is this mutilation done for a long time and is still in practice today, but this mutilation is performed on infants barely a week old. It is done practically casually to one of the sexes, and doing the equivalent to the other sex is considered completely unthinkable and barbaric. Guess which one is which? For those not getting the hint, I am talking about infant male genital mutilation and what you may euphemistically call circumcision, or what you may yet erroneously call a routine medical operation. I am not here to preach to the choir, so to speak. This video is directed to you, the conservatives and anti-woke that talk extensively about the harms of, your words, genital mutilation, and yet do not talk about the most common and long-standing kind of genital mutilation done to the youngest possible age in a specific sex, commonly regarded as disposable, expendable, or sometimes evil and a danger to womankind, as per gynocentric sloganism. You, who live in North America, talk about the tragedy of the irreversible removal of organs. The subject of females undergoing this is given more screen time, so to speak, despite the fact that male-to-female transitions are more common, if I'm not mistaken. When you do, for one reason or another, respond to the subject of forcible amputation of the male foreskin, some of you respond like this. How dare you compare taking off a flap of skin, some of you say just a tip, to the amputation of organs, paraphrasing something Ben Shapiro once said. Circumcision is not an amputation, if you are Matt Walsh and don't know that amputations aren't just for limbs but any functioning part of the body. And circumcision has stood the test of time, if you are Brent Weinstein and refuse to admit that it's an actual mutilation or at least an excruciating procedure so as to not offend his circumcising audience. I would like to address two things for your consideration. One, the functional, non-obsolescent purpose of the foreskin, and two, the torture a days-old infant goes through during its removal. The human male foreskin, which yes, females also have foreskin, is there for an actual reason. It serves as protection of the glans penis, which forcible removal of it results in keratinization and therefore desensitization of the glands. Only abject Puritans that are hell-bent on demonizing male sexuality would presume to inflict this at a period of a male's life in which he is completely unable to fight for his bodily autonomy or his own rights. The foreskin also serves as the mechanism of sexual intercourse for the adult male. If you allege to be able to have sex while having been circumcised yourself, then it is completely in spite of, not because of, the lack of foreskin. It is reasonable to guess that you likely use an absurd amount of lubricant. Intercourse with intact genitalia generally needs no such additional lubrication. The removal of the foreskin is so excruciating for the infant that he actually goes into neurogenic shock. This is what the nurses euphemistically call sleeping through the operation. Lying to ignorant parents that don't even know why they are arranging to have their child's genitals mutilated, with the exception that it's just a cultural norm. Everybody does it. Anesthetic is not used because it's generally considered dangerous to use it. How ironic. They are not even bandaged properly after the fact, and bloody diapers are common. Nerve endings, again, there for a reason, are ripped. Neurons in the brain's pleasure center are left to completely atrophy. The brain actually rewires itself. Cortisol levels spike high. That brain chemistry is altered and the levels stay spiked for a good 6 months. Note that cortisol is a stress hormone. Everything associated with trauma and PSTD manifests itself one way or another later in life. Furthermore, babies actually die from this procedure. They actually have their genitalia completely mutilated beyond recognition sometimes completely castrated due to an error. All because parents wanted to have their designer children and corrupt doctors were willing to fill their depraved desires. It never needed to happen, and the world over, outside the United States and sadly a few other countries, don't assault their male children this way. In other words, you're alone, relatively speaking. If you are making excuses about how supposedly clean it is or how medically beneficial it is, then you're not speaking in terms of common sense. You're not speaking from the position of common sense in the slightest. You are directly talking about how fine it is, supposedly, for males to risk their own life, not even by their own hands, at the 8th day of life. You are turning a blind eye to the fact that harvested foreskins get sold to cosmetics companies, the prime example being SkinMedica. Female media personalities such as Oprah and Sandra Bullock openly have promoted the use of such products made with infant genital flesh with impunity. They are open and talking about it because it is too normalized among their vast audience, and at present they have no fear of recourse being open about it. This is the gynocentric world order at work, while you sit back and complain about how women and girls are being erased. This is the reason of my major complaint against you, the conservative and non-woke presenting yourself as the forerunner against genital mutilation of children in the United States, North America, as if it were a brand new scourge that took us by surprise, whereas you say absolutely nothing with regards to inflicting brain-altering agony and torture and precluding the sex life they would eventually be left with in adulthood. Some of you mock the idea that an infant male should not be cut in the most sensitive part of their life. You mock those who advocate on their behalf. You appear to be dismissive of the fact that mothers submit their own son to this procedure, and I paraphrase, so they would actually get laid or would get a blowjob because women think intact male genitals are ugly. This is nothing short of grooming behavior. Do you allege to support grooming when it is your own kind that does it? If you are genuinely and unequivocally against child genital mutilations, then prove that you are consistent and sincere and start speaking up about infant male genital mutilation. You cannot speak about the subject of genital mutilation without placing top priority on the most vastly practiced kind. If your response is, but trans surgeries are currently what's happening now, so this requires urgent attention instead, by your own logic, you're the one ignoring the one that's currently happening now. It is again done to the youngest age, at the most vulnerable point in their life, mentally and physically, and done so casually, oftentimes nobody's sure why it's even done, except it manifests itself as a cultural norm, or even worse, a family tradition. An argument I see every so often is that it's been done to my grandfather and my father and to me, and now I'm going to do it to my own sons. A family tradition of knife-point pedophilic abuse and grooming is nothing to be proud of, to put it mildly. If you speak against child surgeries but ignore the most serious child surgery in North America, cosmetic, not medical, then you are nothing short of a hypocrite. You are more vulgar than a mere hypocrite if you mock the pain of the act called circumcision, and likewise mock the fact that a man is not his whole self physically. You are no more supportive of male victims of violence than the gynocentric masses, who laugh when men are in the receiving end of violence, especially by women. I challenge you, who grandstand about one kind of mutilation, to talk about all mutilations, which you may fear you have been performed upon you. You had it performed on you, and you are hesitant to admit that you have been helplessly victimized in infancy, or worse, you may fear you've already inflicted it on your male children. Regret parents are recognized within the intactivist community. While it is true that it's far less than an ideal situation in which you should have learned the truth before a permanent change has been inflicted on your own son, it is at least a stepping stone to spread the message that it is a mistake that can be avoided from this point onwards. In any case, I challenge you to place infant male genital mutilation in a high priority in your crusade against genital mutilations of minors, or at the very least, put it on equal terms with the barbarity of transgender surgeries. If you remain silent on this, you may be a coward, and you may be even projecting hard as you scream with full attention against transgender surgeries to distract you from the hypocrisy you desperately want to hide. If you are a conservative or a non-woke who is willing to recognize the problem of infant male genital mutilation at least as equally as you claim to be concerned about child trans surgeries, then please reach out to me. Let us talk.